Okay, everyone, we're back in another AI conversation, and I'm back with my one of my favorite mga not I wouldn't call you a guest anymore, Prof. Ben. You're like a mainstay. But
Partner
anyway,
is
welcome
a good
back, Prof.
word.
Ben. No, and I think we have a very timely conversation, and I think you have some interesting stuff to share. No, so take it away.
Indeed. Yeah. So hello, Doc. It's been a while, but it's always a pleasure being with you in your vlog. I have definitely some things to share because I've been monitoring the conversations on AI,
Mm-hmm.
especially as it relates to students using them. As you know, I've been a teacher for 41 years, so this really always tickles my fancy. And since I've been dealing with a lot of students lately and they're all using AI, I think it's an important conversation to have. What are the impacts of AI misuse and how we can steer it towards AI proper use? So I start with the provocative title. I hope it achieves the goal. Yung title ko dito is Puppets and Parrots or Scientists and
I
Sages.
think this is a book waiting to happen. I don't know, baka nasulat mo na pala yung libro.
Yeah, well, it's something I'm working on definitely, but the landscape, as you know, is moving so fast. As soon as you write a thesis down, everything has changed.
Wala na, no? Yeah.
But this is my current thinking. So ang ginawa kong subtitle, The Goals of Philippine Higher Education and the Implications of Student Use of Generative AI.
Okay.
The reason I'm tying these metaphors of puppets and parrots to the goal of producing scientists and sages is because the Philippine educational system actually has formal goals. So any system to be defined as a system, dapat may goal siya, di ba? May pinapatunguhan. But
Yep.
I think many of the public are not familiar because it's really not being explained. So I've served in some capacity as a member of technical panels for CHED since 2004, so I have some knowledge of what CHED is trying to aim for. So in the images here, which I fully acknowledge was produced by ChatGPT, you can see here on the left yung puppet image. So you see students being puppets to the AI. And then a little bit to the right, you see students as parrots. No? So I'll elaborate on this point.
Yan na nga.
Obviously, this is not what we want. We want them to move towards the right, to be critically thinking scientists, and ultimately to be wise citizens and, members of society, or what I like to call sages.
Mm.
So I'll go through this story slowly. So first, let's start with the goals of higher education. If you look at the CHED website, the policies of CHED are captured in what we call CMOs, no? CHED Memorandum Orders. This one is particularly important kasi 2013 pa to, so more than 10 years na, di ba? So parang ito yung blueprint So for what it means to be highly educated in the Philippines. By highly educated, what we mean is somebody who completed higher education. So the subject title is quite suggestive. Sinasabi niya, holistic understandings, intellectual and civic competencies. So let's break this down because in the language
And
of
this is
Chet,
2013, no? So more than a decade ago, pretty much.
yeah. So lumagpas na yung anniversary nito ko. In fact, if you're following the news, there's a lot of discussion now on some changes in the curriculum as well, which is another reason why I think this is an important conversation to have because I am an advocate of liberal education, which is what, a generally highly educated person is about. So when Chet defines this, it looks at the following categories. So when it looks at intellectual competencies, dapat yung marunong mag-isip, no? May mental skills. So what are some manifestations of this? So ito, higher levels of comprehension rather.
Comprehension.
So pagka nagbabasa ng mga text materials or tumitingin ng movies or pinapanood yung podcast ni Doc Ligot, naiintindihan. Secondly, proficient and effective in communicating, whether in writing, speaking, or using technologies. And here I want to emphasize that proficient means the ability to articulate. Hindi yung pag tinatanong mo, nga or nabubulunan, right? Or stuttering or stammering. So proficiency is really a very high level of intellectual competency that CHED is aiming for. And then all of this should be coming from understanding of basic concepts across the domain. So domains can vary. Kung major mo, biology, you deeply understand and you're not just parroting the concepts and principles of biology. Let's say you're explaining osmosis, meiosis, mitosis. You don't just memorize that from a book. You can actually explain it in your own words. If you had to explain it to your younger sister who never took a course in biology, that's what we mean by mental skills and understanding. The other aspect of the mental skills is something we're very familiar with, critical, analytical, and creative thinking. So here we're able to surface the assumptions, the evidence, the supporting premises for any conclusions we make. We're able to break down any sentence and say what part of that is evidence, what part of that is an assumption, etc. And then we're able to apply different analytical modes. No? Can we apply numbers? Can we apply stories? Can we apply images, etc.? Tests, observations. So you can see that the CHED has a very comprehensive list of capabilities, no? Mental skills. Of course, typically when we talk about mental skills, these are meant to be generally unaided. What that means is that, for example, when a student or a graduate is explaining something, he should not be constantly looking at his phone. For example, if he's a young manager and then he's making a proposal to top management, he cannot be constantly looking at his phone. He has to have a certain proficiency that comes from his deep understanding of what he is proposing. And then the other thing, of course, is that there are other competencies, personal and civic responsibilities. Kasi marami to, so in-underline ko lang in red yung sa tingin ko quite relevant for our discussion, no? Such as the capacity to personally interpret. I will use this a lot because, for example, when I ask students to watch a movie and then to submit a review of the movie, sometimes they're tempted to submit a review from AI when actually I asked them to watch the movie. So they should have experienced it and they should be able to interpret it themselves. But sometimes when students are candid enough, they do admit that they're not able to string sentences together anymore. Now, they're slowly losing that ability because of
And this is
excessive.
at the college level, right?
Yes, yes. But I've gotten the same feedback from senior high school because I've also conducted seminars there. And then ito, very important, no? Because this is what we're doing right now, no? We're reflecting critically on a shared concern, which is the future of the country and the future of AI. So the ability to have that reflective discussion, focused discussion is very important for a higher education graduate. And in practical terms, ito yung nakalista sa baba, no? So this is dead on in terms of what we're talking about because we're talking about technology. So indeed, a lot of industry people are saying, ano ba tinuturo nyo on how to use technology? Talagang duty ng higher education yan. We should teach the application of computing and information technology to assist and facilitate knowledge building and knowledge sourcing, no? Which we normally call research. And then the ability to negotiate the world of technology responsibly. So by negotiate, kasi maraming options, di ba? So we're able to choose among options. We're able to advocate for the proper use of this, for the minimal use of this, or for the avoidance of this. This is what we mean by negotiate. And then we're able to solve problems. And of course, we're able to get actual work done. So ito yung general education outcome. So when we talk about CHED's outcome-based education system, it means that all teachers are tasked to produce certain capabilities in students. Now, in specific domains, kunyari business or chemical engineering, meron pang mas specific dito. But I'll focus on this mainly because it covers all domains. Now, I make the point here, based on what we just saw, the goal of higher education is real intelligence. So the focus of real intelligence is uninterested in truth seeking so that it can guide reasoned action in the world. So it is not the goal of higher education to produce artificial intelligence. The production of artificial intelligence was the agenda of computer scientists and software developers. But now these two domains have intersected and there's a lot of potential for good, but we're also dealing with a lot of risks at the moment. So I tried to capture this in this diagram. So since the goal of real intelligence is the pursuit of truth, I use the word pursuit because you can never know 100% of the truth. It's something that you're constantly aiming for, like a North Star. You're moving towards it, but of course you will never reach it. because the North Star is a distance from us. But the basis of doing that is because we want to understand reality. Now, our understanding of reality will always be limited, kaya nga we're always trying to find out more. So whatever, if it's political news or a disaster or what happened to our friend, we want to know the truth. But we're trying to do it through various means, now asking people, looking at social media. But the goal is always the same. Ano bang nangyari? Or as the locals say, anyari, no? And then we want to know the truth about that. Once we are comfortable with our understanding of the truth, we want to use that understanding to act on the world. So these are the basic elements of real intelligence. But as we become more advanced, we can also model our understanding of the world using computers and machines, in which case we simulate reality with data. So we simulate in many ways. We simulate statistically, we simulate through digital pictures. Movies are also simulations of images. In other words, they represent reality. So models are essentially representations of the world. So when we take a picture of our party with our phone, we're essentially simulating the party through a picture. And then, of course, based on that simulation, we are now able to predict events, now forecasting outcomes based on the model. So if it's a statistical model, we can input an X, get a Y. If it's a visual model, a picture, we can see from the size of the party in the picture, we can predict na, oh, they were probably happy there kasi marami sila. Or kung dalawa lang yung nasa picture, we can say, nilangaw yan, hindi sila masaya dyan. And then from that, we can now produce outputs based on these models. So all of these are involved in real intelligence, but the core is pursuing the truth. Now, what happened in generative AI, because it's machine-based, it started with the modeling itself. Because Gen AI or foundation models are not programmed to seek the truth because they're essentially pattern matching or pattern detecting tools, di ba? You feed them a lot of data and the data you feed them, it will not ask, totoo ba tong data ang pinapasok mo sa akin? Di ba? So, basta tatanggapin niya lang yon, tapos maghahanap siya ng patterns doon. So, which is why it's still very relevant to recall yung principle of computing, which is garbage in, garbage out, right? So, wala kasing truth filter talaga ang data when they're fed to LLM. Of course, if companies are very careful in curating data, they would have that function, except that large language models really require tremendous amounts of data, so curating them all will always be a challenge. Ngayon, when we ask, how does higher education aim to achieve yung sinasabi natin kanina, yung mga higher order competencies? We always use what we call Bloom's taxonomy. So if we talk to any teacher, alam nila to eh. They have memorized this now. So all teachers are told that when we are teaching students, we want them to first, and these are cumulative. We cannot proceed to the higher level without knowing some aspects of the lower level. So first is remembering what are basic facts, concepts, and this doesn't need deep understanding. So concepts could include terminologies. And of course, some people say we don't need to remember terminologies anymore, or we don't need to remember anything anymore. But actually, in any domain, we have to remember certain things. No? So when we drive, we have to remember what a red light means, which is the opposite of a green light, because if we don't remember that, we will not even be able to stop in a stoplight. When we watch a basketball game, we need to know what a foul means. When we watch a tennis game, we need to know that love is not a positive thing in tennis. So remembering cannot be dispensed with. So yung mga basic terminologies, dapat alam na alam ng mga students yan. So when I talk to my students in strategic management, for example, they might make very sophisticated presentations. But then I ask them, okay, so when you say product differentiation there, could you clarify what you mean? And then when they define it, it's not necessarily the technical meaning that is meant in the field of strategic management. They're using a layman's meaning of product differentiation. So because in strategy, it means you have a feature that stands out from everybody else. But sometimes they use product differentiation to simply mean a tweak in the product. Let's say they customize it for the local market because it's from a foreign company. But you know that customization is also offered by other competitors. So I remind them that product differentiation means you stand out. So that's the real meaning of it. So there's a tendency for students to sometimes interpret certain words the way they naturally understand it because it takes more effort to read what is meant by it in the particular reading. And this is where it gets interesting. If they can remember certain terms, the next challenge is to understand them. And this is where the problem begins when they misuse AI. And I'll build on this point now. So in understanding, they now have to interpret, meaning they have to make an effort to explain this in their own words. So what does this mean? Because if they don't do this part, they end up just parroting those words. So the key here is that there is a mental effort in interpreting because it literally means struggling to explain it in your own words. For my students, I even encourage them because English is not a first language. I tell them, explain it in Filipino. Because if you can explain it in Filipino, that means you really understand it. Then I'll just check if your understanding is correct. And then, of course, as you move up, there's applying, meaning you now apply it in a new situation that is was not found in your reading. And we can already see that if you did not understand it, you'll have problems applying it. And then when you're now given new situations, you're asked to break it down. This is called analyzing. And then if you're given the outputs of others, you're asked, is this a good output? Is this a good strategy? If not, why not? And then ultimately, all students are asked to produce something, a product like a paper or a vlog. No, we even ask them to make vlogs. So notice that when we look at the levels of learning, essentially we're talking about two P's, which is performance and product, meaning they have to perform certain competencies so that we know that they're learning, and ultimately they're supposed to produce products. So a product might be a paper, a video, a proposal, a position paper, questions in a public forum. So all of these are things that they produce. The challenge is, hinting at the problems we're facing with AI, is that if they only produce products and you don't know if if the product came from real understanding, then it is entirely possible that the product was entirely produced by AI. So this is where the challenges begin. So building on this point, how do students actually learn? This has been studied a lot by cognitive scientists for a long time, and this is called the generation effect. Essentially, if you look at learning psychology research, they find out that the neural pathways in the brain, which is built when you're learning something, happens when the learner produces something. So that means we cannot really learn passively in the sense that whatever we experience passively does not stay in the brain. It goes in and then it goes out. If we want it to stay in the brain, we have to do something actively. So this is why it's called active production. So for example, if we watch a movie, but then we watch it alone, we did not talk with anyone about it, after a while, it's like we never saw the movie. If we see the movie 2 years later, it's like we're watching a new movie. But if we were watching the movie and then we were arguing with our friend whether the lead character should have left his girlfriend, and then we have this discussion, or if we leave the movie house after the movie and then our friend asks us, what did you like about that movie? So the mere act of trying to remember what we liked about the movie or posting a review and anything that requires generation will build learning about the movie that we can recall later because active production enhances memory, it enhances recall, and in general, it improves learning. So let's just think of it as if there's a field. I remember when I was young, I lived in a subdivision where we had roads, but there were some empty lots. Being the young, disobedient boy that I was, I would not walk along the streets. I would cut across the fields, even though there were talahibs there. No? After a while, I would keep cutting and cutting. Before I knew it, there's already a path there, a shortcut. So this is like the neural pathway in the brain. By actively crossing that field, I was actually building a shortcut. And that's how brain scientists define learning. You're building a path where there was no path before. That path cannot be built passively. You have to actively build it. And by the way, this is also how large language models learn. No? They build pathways through repeated trips down that path. Now, what is the opposite of the generation effect? Well, if we look at it, this clarifies what we mean by the brain's learning. No? It's called plasticity. So brain cells create neural pathways during learning. We often call this muscle memory, but that's really an expression. No? The memory is not in the muscle, it's in the brain. So here we have two neurons. And then as we're experiencing something, let's say we're playing tennis or we're learning how to play the piano. Now I'm starting to learn piano using AI. So I only started learning at 62. So now I'm at the intermediate level. So AI is very helpful. But of course, I'm a slower learner than young people. But as I practice every piano piece, the neurons, the dendrites, which are the extensions of the neuron, begin to extend to other neurons beside it. And before you know it, these two neurons now have a pathway. So let's call this, because now I'm learning the song, A Thousand Years, the one from Twilight. So as I keep practicing it, these neural paths are building. Now, the point is, this takes effort. The generation effect, meaning the neurons will not naturally reach out. So just imagine if there's no effort, the brain cells of students are literally separate from each other. The expression I think in Filipino is kaya when you ask them questions, medyo lutang. Nothing is, they cannot generate an answer because essentially the neurons are not firing, right? Because they don't know each other. The neurons don't know each other yet. Because it takes a while for neurons to get to know each other. It takes effort and therefore the generation effect. The opposite has been sort of documented by researchers. They call it AKIKA, which stands for AI chatbot induced cognitive atrophy.
This is a new framework. Parang first time I've heard of it.
Yes, the research I think came out within the last two months, so you can Google it in Archive and other journals. But this is actually the opposite of what we were seeing earlier. So if these neural networks are not built, then what happens is because of over-reliance, there is no generation effect. Why is there no generation effect? Because there is cognitive offloading. Now, all of us who used to drive without Waze can relate to this. I was driving all my life, and then when Waze came along, I offloaded everything to Waze.
You got
So
lazy
now,
na in terms of your directions.
yeah, so my ability to navigate is now near zero, but there is Grab. There is my wife who drives much better than I do. So no harm, no foul, right? So that means it's something I can safely offload because it's not essential to my profession. It's not essential to my survival. Knocking on wood, no? I hope Grab will always be around. But the result of that is reduced cognitive functioning. So meaning to say, every time I have to go to a new place, I always have to check, oh, is there a battery in my phone so that I can check Waze? If not, then I have to check if I'm going to take public transport. Where do I go? Is it east? Is it west? Is it south? So the problem with cognitive function weakening, the weaker you are, the more you will look for the AI because you don't have the function anymore because of the constant offloading. And the more you use AI, the more over-reliance and so on and so forth. So the spiral continues. So I personally have to force myself to drive every now and then so I can still go to the grocery when my wife asks me to get something. Because sometimes I even make wrong turns just going to the grocery, which is just less than 3 kilometers away. So we can look at this as two sides of a coin, no? So, or opposing sides rather. We have the generation effect, which builds the neural pathways. Then there is Akika, which does not build the pathways. It does not really interrupt the pathways. It just doesn't build them because the building is the important thing for learning. So in relation to this, if a student doesn't have the pathways and therefore the student cannot articulate, because you remember in the CHED guidelines, the student should have such a mastery that when you engage him to discuss an issue, let's say you're in a class in political science or government, then you ask him, so what is the basis of the check and balance in the Constitution? And what are your views on the current issue on the impeachment? And then they look at you, even though you discuss all of those principles of what it means to have a bicameral system, what is the duty of Congress vis-a-vis the duty of the executive, when they're now trying to formulate an answer, nothing works. Now, depending on the mental state of the student, he might simply say, sir, I don't know how. I have not studied it, or sir, I've studied it, but I still don't understand it. So this is truthful. Or they can say, sir, I've studied it and I know it, but I'm not feeling well now. Can I answer next meeting? And then, of course, there's a third variation. They will say something. In Tagalog, I say nagmemema, no? So, pag nagmemema, uh, because they're caught in the moment, they will wing it. Or as some young people call it, fake it till you make it. The philosopher Harry Frankfurt called it bullshitting. Bullshitting means when you're asked, you say something persuasive because your goal is to persuade the person that your statement has meaning, but actually you don't know if what you're saying is true. And you don't know if what you're saying is something you actually understand. So I guess this is as close as could be to parroting something. But sometimes you also make it up because to parrot means you're repeating something that AI may have said. So I'm putting this slide because it is often the result of akika. It's not that students, for example, like being blindsided by questions or not having anything to say, but it's just that they have lost the capacity. So they're literally lost. No? So when you're lost, you try to guess, and therefore sometimes you end up bullshitting. Now, there are some approaches against this. So how do we build the learning that's so important? One model I like, which is what I'll show later, because I built an AI chatbot coach to help with cognitive understanding. It's relatively simple to build because all the AI platforms allow us to make custom GPTs. So we can just use this as a model to help us understand certain concepts. So I like this because it's very simple. It says CI. So CI just means state the idea clearly. So if you're reading something, let's say a chapter on or an article. So for example, now I'm studying this article that came out on, they were testing whether the AI could achieve understanding. So these were some folks from MIT and Harvard. And so some parts of it were a bit difficult. So I tried to understand it. It was taking me a while. So I made a chatbot to help me understand it. So I'll share it later. So after stating the idea clearly, you start to elaborate on it. And this is where the effort begins because if you remember, as we go up the taxonomy, we're saying state it. So the state is like remembering, and then elaborate is now understanding. So you're interpreting it in your own words. And then also you're trying to explain related concepts which are not the same as this concept. So notice this method is also used in training AI, right? So we show a cat, then we show a dog. So this is a cat, this is not a cat, because this is a dog. So notice that the way we build neural pathways is exactly how large language models were built. The tragedy is because large language models are so good at it, there is now the cognitive offloading, and especially young people are not developing the ability anymore. And then the second E is to give examples. This is what concretizes a concept. And they're also asked to give non-examples. So deep understanding is not only shown by elaboration and exemplification, it's also shown by showing opposites. And this is the one I like the most. So make a picture or make an analogy or metaphor. Anyway, students like saying parang, so I tell them, okay, if it's parang, that means you're going to share an analogy or a metaphor. Unfortunately, when students say parang, it actually signals that they're not sure they understand something. So they say parang, they're actually grasping. But I encourage them to use parang when they're actually going to use a metaphor or a some kind of analogy because it will help with the neural pathway. So I make a note here, students learn from examples and non-examples. I notice, even though I've been teaching 41 years, this is not my strength. When I teach, I'm always giving examples. I often forget to give non-examples. And then when I receive the paper, I see a lot of wrong examples. Then I realize it wasn't enough to teach the concept with examples. I should have also taught non-examples.
Dapat double blind.
Exactly.
Okay.
So actually, it doubles the work.
Mm.
But as we've learned with the large language models, if you show a lot of examples and non-examples, the learning of the AI is much faster than just showing examples. No?
Yep.
So that for me is a reverse insight that I got from the field of LLMs, which I should have known as a teacher, but I'm only learning some things late in my life. Now here, uh, so deep conceptual understanding using the CI framework. So I'll build on that earlier slide. Structured method for building and demonstrating conceptual understanding. And this is the key because remember, the students, when they're reading silently. So I tell them when they're reading, read aloud. Tell your friends or your your kabahay na the reason you're reading aloud is you want to hear what you're saying because your ear will get used to hearing what you're saying so that when you're talking in class or talking to your teacher, you are now able to articulate because you have heard yourself before. So literally to articulate means to actually say it and so that you can deeply understand it. So here, again, just to restate what I already showed in the earlier slide, clearly state the concept in your own words, explain what you mean by expanding or clarifying your statement. Also explain what the concept does not mean. So remember, as the student is doing this, the neural pathways are being built. When I was reading the article lately, I was really struggling with two. So when you visualize a struggle in number two, literally your brain is using a shovel to dig through cement. In other words, there's nothing there. You're digging through cement. It's gonna break your shovel, but if you persist, you will dig a rut through that cement, and now you can go through that in the future. It's how I feel about piano because I'm so old, my fingers don't always respond. But now when I'm playing certain pieces, everything is so smooth that means the ruts have been built. And then exemplify, provide a concrete example that demonstrates the concept. Again, provide non-examples and then illustrate with a diagram, analogy, or metaphor to show how the concept works. So let's look at this. If you apply this to a common concept, because my students like to use the word resilience, it also forced me to study it more. Sometimes they use the word grit, which was the title of a best-selling book. So I also read that book. So
Angela Duckworth ba?
that one, yes, that one. So it's a very interesting concept. I think it's very timely as well for young people because they have undergone a lot of challenges. Social media, certainly, I did not grow up with all of the challenges of social media. They did. So I think this is a powerful concept. So if we ask the psychologists, this is how they define resilience is the process of adapting well in the face of adversity, trauma, tragedy, threats, or significant sources of stress. So as you would expect, isang tingin pa lang ng estudyante diyan nakakatulog na eh. Ano ba yan? Resilience. But when they struggle to dig through the cement and say, ano ba yan? What does it mean? So they can say something like, is the ability to bounce back from challenges or setbacks. Again, I encourage them to do this first in Filipino, then translate it to English. Because if they're not very articulate in English to begin with, this will not work because they don't have the vocabulary. But if they can say it in Filipino, the Filipino language being so strong in their upbringing, it kicks in. And then they can just translate it. So when they elaborate, it means that when something difficult happens, you can recover, emotionally or mentally and continue moving forward without giving up. Certainly, this elaboration is much better than the original one. So partly the problem in education is that researchers, scientists, and teachers have a unique talent for making the simplest ideas sound really complicated. And then here they say, it is not endurance. So this is to draw the opposite of what elaborate is rather what resilience is from endurance, because endurance is simply continuing under pressure without necessarily recovering or adapting. Now, this is important because uh, your ability to bounce back may not be there. You just have endurance because you're really tough. So being tough and resilient are not exactly the same thing, but they're related. It is not being stoic or simply suppressing emotions or hardships without processing them. This one, I think we can see that it's really not the same because if you're being stoic and you're not processing, you could actually be having already a mental health problem inside you, but you're not showing it outside. Some people whom we see as stoic, some because of all the suppression, develop ulcers, develop high blood pressure, and some even commit self-harm or suicide. There's a typo here, apology. So exemplify. So building on resilience again, exemplify means a student fails a test but studies harder and passes the next one instead of giving up. Opposite examples, it is not a student giving up after failing a test and no longer trying, clearly. It is not a businessman avoiding the challenges of expansion and competing to avoid failure. So these are not examples of resilience. And to illustrate, I love this illustration, like a rubber band that stretches under pressure but returns to its original shape. So we can see how nifty the CI approach is. That's why I found it so easy to make uh, a chat, a custom GPT using it. Now, and I'll show that later. Now, because I was trying to help my students develop their use of AI, but in a way that will not make them akika prone, I developed this framework. This is related to the graphic I showed earlier in my title slide. And I have a fuller description of each of these level, which I can share with you, Doc, if you're interested. But in general, I just ask myself, when I observe students using AI, the lowest level is puppet, passive acceptor. So they read and then they act as if what they just read is true. They don't question it. And by the way, this is not unique to AI. When SMS came around, this was already an experience that we have. We receive SMS, then we assume it's true. In fact, we forward it to all our friends. So already it began. But with AI, of course, it became more uh, rapid in the way it spread, and content is becoming generated. Now, SMS came from human beings, but now AI generates content, so it passes it around, and then I suppose it's like a virus in a way, a mental virus. You pick it up and then you accept it into your body without question. You don't even protect yourself, you just assimilate it. Uh, Maybe a little bit higher, but still not a positive level, is that of a parrot. A parrot, instead of just being a passive acceptor, repeats the information, meaning actively spreads the information, repeats AI summaries without deep understanding. Of course, in the news media, we know that newscasters are reading from a teleprompter, right? So in a way, that's a form of parroting. So some students also, when they present in class, they say they are reporting. So that's partly our fault. As teachers, we ask students to report. I personally don't use that term. I tell them you're going to lead a discussion. So you give me your take on the article, and then you open the discussion with some key questions and takeaways, and then we take it from there. But it's a habit of theirs to really think that they're reporting, which means it's like they're reading from a teleprompter. In fact, their favorite teleprompter is their mobile phone, which is why in my classes, the mobile phones are banned. No, they cannot look at it when they're presenting. So the two lower levels are to be avoided because for me, they're symptoms of akika. What we need is to help our students to move up to the next three levels, which are researcher, which is a knowledge builder. So they can use AI, but they get the information from it because they know the limitations of AI. They know its strengths. So they're able to synthesize it with other sources so that they build a coherent understanding of the subject matter. Beyond a researcher, here they're now already scientists, which I call critical synthesizers. So they're now able to test ideas using AI. So for example, if they have a scenario, what if this is my understanding? Is this consistent with this other article? So then they can check whether it is consistent by being prompted by the AI, and then they verify for themselves. So it's like having a coach with you to test whether your initial ideas are effective. And of course, I encourage my students to go to the highest level because as citizens, we have to be wise, wisdom seekers, sages. This is now when we apply the knowledge that we synthesize from here to apply better judgment and foresight to our lives and to our work. So, of course, the most important question now, I was just talking to one of my students. She just attended a meeting. this is in a major corporation where they were already told that their job category may not exist within the next 3 years because of AI. And so, of course, she was feeling a bit sad. But I was saying, well, you see, that's how companies are thinking now. The important thing is, what are you thinking about it? And then how can you make yourself resilient and robust to deal with those changes? In other words, how do you become wise given the thinking of your company? So obviously, what we're trying to do is support the goals of CHED for general higher education without students falling into the trap of becoming parrots and puppets. Because we cannot run a competitive country if all our young citizens are parrots and puppets. They will just be manipulated. They will be controlled like a mob. So this brings us to the question, how can generative AI help students develop deep conceptual understanding? So this is what I've been playing with. So I'm just sharing this for the first time with you, Doc, uh, because I hope this will trigger bigger conversations on how to address the Akika problem, but use AI as leverage. So I start with the do nots. Do not use Gen AI like a knowledge model because there are knowledge models such as ontologies, knowledge graphs, scientific theories, expert systems. These are knowledge models. A knowledge model means every entry in that model is really anchored on a claim, and then there are rules for what that claim relates to. So, for example, Ben Teehankee is a professor. That's a knowledge claim that's embedded in a knowledge graph. It's not just an accidental or statistical mishmash of words that Ben Teehankee and then professor, then you just randomly throw them together, which is why LLMs tend to think I'm from Harvard or Oxford or Cambridge or not, because it's statistical. They're just throwing things together, and then by the luck of the draw, by statistical probability, sometimes it's correct, sometimes it's not. But in a knowledge graph, it's like a relational database. Claims are actually anchored to their partners, as references. Number two, do not let Gen AI simply generate content. Because as we said, if we keep generating, which is what is the strength of Gen AI, but if we generate before the generative effect kicks in, then it leads to Akika. Do use it as a statistical language model because it's brilliant as a language model. That's what it was designed for. Let's use it as such. Because a coach does not have to be a terrific player. The best basketball coach was not the best basketball player. He's a good coach. But when he works with a terrific basketball player, that basketball player becomes 10x, even 100x. That's why let's use a statistical model to help us deeply understand. Let's not expect the statistical model to learn for us because it is not designed to actually understand and learn. It's designed to really just have statistical language patterns. So this is a process that I've been playing with. Uh, okay, this is the process. Okay, let us use Gen AI to guide the students to experience the generation effect because this is what we're triggering, the generation effect. So this is the process. The AI will prompt the student to read and study the concept carefully and then generate their own understanding using the CI framework and then compare their understanding with the source text and revise their understanding and then use Gen AI feedback to compare their understanding with the source text. Now, I always say use with caution since AI does not really understand the concept. When a coach tells you, "Shumut ka na, kaya mo na yan," it doesn't mean that the coach himself is a good shooter. He is just able to see your position relative to the ring and to the defending players, and then he says, "That's a good probability. You can make it if you shoot from there." So that's what a coach does. And then once you complete these 4 steps, present to your classmates and the teacher for feedback, and then iterate until mastery. So this is really an iterative process. Just like I was saying, the path I built through the talahib in my subdivision did not happen overnight. In fact, it was over 2 months. Then everybody was following me already. Of course, later on, I got feedback that I should not have been doing that. But it was helpful. It saved me a lot of time. So I think to understand this idea, I'd like to do a demonstration, Doc, if I may. So what I did was I made a small, because in my AI class in MBA, I make them all do custom GPTs, and I'll do that here.
That means everyone has a subscription.
Well, because if you're a student in LaSalle, you all have the standard Gemini in the
So
workspace.
the
Yeah.
ability to create
Yeah, so
account.
the gem feature is available. Although some of them I found out they are paying for ChatGPT, so they can do custom GPTs. And then some of them have other tools. Okay, so this is where I went. Okay, because I think I mentioned to you that I'm reading this new article. This article was done by some folks out of MIT. And actually, when I was reading this, Doc, I remembered you because you sent me a very nice graphic of the Kepler and the Copernican models. Do you remember?
Yeah, it's my favorite analogy.
Yes, so I think your time has come because that uh, comparison of Kepler and Newton was used by this group of MIT
Mm.
and Harvard professors to develop a very nice test for whether AI is learning. So, if you remember the Kepler situation, Kepler could predict all the planetary motions, but he was doing it through a very complex model, if you remember, right? So actually, Newton came along and said, no, it's simpler with this. You just use forces, gravity, and then, it's just orbits. So in other words, the authors are saying, are LLMs more like Newton or more like Kepler? Because if they're pattern matching, Kepler was a perfect pattern matcher. He could, by detecting patterns, predict planetary motions, but he had no understanding at all of why planets moved. But he could predict where they would be. So it's a wonderful article. It's taken me a while to understand it, but there is a nice YouTube of it, which I saw first before I read this. But so I was reading this. So what I said was, okay, after reading it and watching the YouTube, I asked myself, okay, do I understand this? Can I explain this to others if I had to explain it? So I built, because I applied a CI, right? So I said, what if students were reading this? What can I do to help them? Okay, so I made a gem. This is the gem here. So if you explore gems, gems are in
Custom bots, basically.
custom bots, yes. In other words, it's something you would do in a one-off, but you don't want to keep doing. So you just put it here so that every time you need it, you just activate it. So this is the one I made, Custom Attainment CI Coach. This is the one. So the way it's designed, so I just gonna show it under the hood so that you see. So here, okay.
Use the pencil. Yeah.
That's the one, yes. So I just put this in and then I just gave it a simple role. You're a patient teacher. This is what I hope I am, although my students say I'm not always patient. You're a patient teacher helping me learn difficult concepts and arguments in a reading. I will give you the text with the concept or argument I'm trying to understand. I will ask you to prompt me using the steps for concept attainment and CI to generate my own understanding of the concept or argument. I will enter my CI understanding and you will point out which aspects I seem to understand and which aspects I need to review and revise. We will iterate the process until I satisfy you that I understand. At no time, this is important, at no time will you give me your own understanding of the concept. Although I notice if I'm not vigilant, something slips through. Then I refine it and say, don't ever do that. At the end of the process, advise me to validate my understanding through sharing with my classmates in study groups, participation in class discussions, and consultation with my teacher. So going back, okay. So this is what I did. So I uploaded so I activated the the CI coach, and I said, help me understand the findings, reasoning, and conclusions in this article. So it went through the slow thinking, and then it says, please state in your own words what you understand to be the main findings of the article. That article title, What Has a Foundation Model Found? Inductive Bias Reveals World Models. So, okay, after struggling, and literally I was struggling, uh, I said, okay, the authors found that foundation models trained on data generated from a world model are not able to extrapolate functions consistent with that world model when inputted new data from the same world model. In other words, the LLMs were not able to generalize. So it's like saying, I learned Kepler's model, but if you give me a new planet, I couldn't predict the orbit of the new planet anymore. I could just predict the planet that the first one. Unlike if you know Newton's model, any planet, I can predict where it will go. So that was the difference, right? Then it says, oh, that's a good start. You've identified a key finding. Pero medyo nabitin siya. Now, to elaborate on that idea, can you explain in other words what this finding means? What are the implications of further details that come to mind when you think about this inability of foundation models to extrapolate consistently? So again, I struggled here again. Okay, let me see. Wait a minute. Parang hindi niya sinave. I thought I had saved it just before our call, but let me see. But there was an earlier conversation when I talked about the same article. I could be hitting a memory limit. Ano? Uh, this is the one I was telling you that he slipped. He gave me answers instead of asking me questions. Okay. Anyway, since I cannot see it anymore, I'll do it live. It's asking me to elaborate. No? So I would say something like, to elaborate. Uh, so in other words, the foundation model, which was trained on data generated from the world model, uh, when fed new data, okay, I'll give an example because this is exemplification. I even answered this with an example earlier, which was trained on data. When fed new data, uh, develops new functions. So imagine Kepler, no, making new functions that are not in the allowable functions from the world model. So I think because I remember your Kepler sharing, when you look at the article, this is how it's shown. So this is the Newton model. Let's call this the world model. But when they trained the LLM, it came up with this model, which is a very sophisticated model, which is actually bullshit, but it can predict. So the problem though is when it predicts and you now apply it to a new planet, the predictions are like this. So you can see the way the vectors are all lopsided, right? Whereas if you use the Newtonian model, the vectors are all pointed at the sun.
You know, I've seen this in in coding. No, if you
Yes,
you
do share.
prompt, yeah, they call it vibe coding na ngayon, which
Yeah.
many developers are still not sold onto for the same reason. Parang
Mm,
you
mm.
ask you ask ano ba mga whatever an AI to code up a website probably will succeed. But if you are more specific about functionality, parang somehow it will brute force its way through it. But then
Yeah,
cut the hood, yun na nga, wow, it's a bloated piece of code. And ako, well, anyway, we can have a more broader Q&A about it. I feel it's the natural limitation of how transformers work. Eh.
indeed.
In a way, we have
Yeah,
to work around the limitations or
yeah,
acknowledge the limitations first. No, there's no
yeah,
real reasoning talaga nangyayari. It's basically a sequence of tokens, and yan nangyayari tuloy. Your formula is a series of tokens, uh,
yes,
but not really true reasoning. I think that should really be emphasized. At least
yes,
the way I interpret it. Siguro from
yeah,
a practical standpoint, on the surface, it appears like it reasoned. Pero if you open the hood, yun na nga, kasi ito may formula eh, or in the case of code,
yeah,
talagang
yeah,
it's, the way I describe it, it's like cardboard and duct tape sa likod. Pero it's
exactly.
very,
Indeed, it reasoned, but
veneer.
the reasoning was fallacious, di ba? But it reasoned in a way that a pattern detector would reason. Kasi pattern nga eh. Like, sometimes I ask my friends, oh, asan si ganon? Ah, kasama si ganon, nag-lunch sila. Tapos sabi, oh, parati silang nagla-lunch ano? Sila ba? Oh, mukhang sila eh. See, so pattern
You
detection.
know, so it's more than just pattern. Certainly it's pattern, but it's patterns optimized to a certain outcome. And the outcome is to make in that anecdote, a generalization about why people spend time together.
Exactly. Oh, yun
Then
yung model.
parang the model will reason it backwards now. Kaya yun.
Yes.
Yeah, that's got wider implications, even beyond
Indeed,
education.
indeed. So I think we will have a very rich discussion. So in other words, it will come up with a model, but what the article showed was that the models it will come up with are nowhere near the original world model. But as you said, it will brute force a model. So therefore, that led me, as you know, I've had a long history with Ched. Because of these concerns, we have a proposed CHED guideline for business schools. Because I believe I belong to the technical panel for business education, but I think this is a challenge that all domains should look at. Eh. The way I dealt with it is we want to give the following guidance to the schools to really intensify education. So everyone should be educated, the faculty, even the non-teaching personnel, and of course the students, on the nature, design, intent, inner workings, and very important, proper use, limitations, and risk for the use of generative AI. So in other words, let's really open the field already. That the products are here, they're often not regulated, but they're being used in many workplaces. So let's understand them and see where they can help us. And then schools are being asked, develop clear guidelines. Now, remember, these are guidelines, so these are not mandatory for the schools, but at least the technical panel is giving a clear direction. Clear guidelines on the proper use. So, for example, the chatbot I made is based on a framework, the CI framework. So teachers can actually use that and then require that when students submit their paper, they also submit the dialogue of the student with the chatbot so that the teacher can see the thought process of the student so that when the student is able to achieve the intended learning outcome or is not able to achieve it, they can see where the problem is. Maybe the problem was not in the S, not even in the E, but in the second E, no, in the exemplify, not the elaboration. And then finally, maybe okay siya sa I. No? At least the teacher can troubleshoot and work with the student and say, okay, I think you're already able to elaborate. But since you're young, you don't have a range of experiences, medyo kinakapos ka when you're asked to come up with examples because that really needs experience. Eh. And then third, this is key. So I think everybody believes we need to update the teaching practices, the research practices, even the service practices, and most importantly, the assessment practices, how we assess students so that we really know if they're achieving the target competencies. And of course, we have to also update the standards for academic integrity because precisely when they submit papers, and I've had experiences like this, even a doctoral student submitted a near perfect doctoral paper with all the references attached because I required that they submit a Google folder with all the references. So the paper, doc, was actually making very plausible claims in the paper, all pointing to the references. But guess what? When I opened each of the reference and cross-validated with the claims in the paper, there was nothing in the papers that supported the claims in the paper. So in other words, even
No
the
kidding. Talagang wala.
yes, actually tumayo yung balahibo ko, Doc, because I did not know it was possible. Because I always believed that, retrieval augmented generation meant if you give the source, it will only make claims based on the source, correct? But in this case, I talked to the student, let's invent a bullshit index, and you tell me through our mutual count how many of the claims in the paper that you reference were validated by the paper. Less than 5%. So meaning the bullshit factor is 95%, extremely high. So I couldn't account for it because he had deleted the dialogues already. This is a major problem. I tell them not to delete the dialogues, but sometimes I delete it. because they say they're using a corporate account, others are using it, etc., blah, blah. So, but after a lot of reflection, guess what happened? We discovered a possible reason why it gave a lot of bullshit claims in the paper. He mentioned his hypothesis. So, in other words, he uploaded 20 references and then he told the AI, I'm writing a management theory paper on the hypothesis that XYZ leads to ABC. Uh, Draft a background for me for the beginning of the paper and use the references that I just uploaded. And then it would write it, right? And then he would craft it, he would make connecting sentences and so on and so forth. So everything looked good. But he missed one important step. Before he submitted, he did not check whether the claims were actually in the paper. He assumed they were correct. So it turns out that in that particular instance, when he said his hypothesis to the AI gave him what he wanted. So in other words, this is an emergent phenomenon. We're already seeing emergent phenomenon everywhere. So even if you make it RAG type, meaning you have the sources, giving it your hypothesis will sometimes convince it that it is better to tell you what you want to hear, not what is actually in the in the references. So we discovered that. So sometimes you have to really be extra strict on the AI and say, absolutely, tell me claims only that I can verify in the source. Otherwise, tell me there's nothing there, something like that. No? So, because as we said, AI development is not a perfect science. There's so much inside the black box that is not fully understood. This is what happened. So I kept that paper and I also kept the analysis of the student. So it's a wonderful evidence of what can happen when we don't know what is happening inside the black box, which is why it goes to the number 4. Business schools are encouraged to collaborate with the developers of AI. By the way, AIC here stands for AI chatbots, to properly assess and improve the Gen AI suitability for academic work because they were really not developed for academic work. They're really general purpose language models. And then monitor the student use of Gen AI and related AI tools and their impact on achieving intended learning outcomes on a continuing basis to guide further action. So, for example, when I teach my GEM coach to my students, then I tell them, okay, master this article and then submit your entire dialogue and then let's engage in discussion. I will now note whether those who are more persistent in using the GEM coach and really revising their thinking based on what the GEM coach was pointing out will have better skill in engaging with me. Now, of course, a lot of this is based on an assumption that they will be honest in doing it, right? Because they might submit a chat, but on the side, they were actually asking, the GEM or rather Gemini to give them the answers anyway. So you could have two AIs that are feeding on each other. That's why the only test is the actual discussion. When I discuss with the students and I can tell right away, oh, it matches, you have that confidence that comes only from having the generation effect. So I think I have, explained to you some of my ideas and tied it up to the goals of CHED and the challenges that AI is confronting us with. But I think there is a way forward if we can use the unique abilities of large language models, but this time not as knowledge sources, but like tutors or coaches. But this will mean really a change in the mindset of teachers and also of the students. So I'll stop here for any insights on your end, Doc.
Yeah. Actually, you should leave that thing on flash mode.
Okay, why don't I do it?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, well, first, thank you for this. I'm sure it's something we will continue to discuss long after this first chat, at least about this subject. I've I've actually been thinking about, as you know, no, I've also been thinking about how do we evolve given the new. I mean, I hate to use a COVID term, parang a new normal, where
Yes,
these
yes.
things are around. And then as an aside, I always pointed out that this is something that assails at least two other fields that have very similar challenges not to education, namely journalism, which is also
Mm,
obsessed with truth, and art, which is in
mm,
a way a meta truth.
mm,
And
mm,
in both cases, the fact that AI can BS itself to create parang news and create what looks superficially as art but has very real consequences in terms of
Mm.
disinformation. And then in the art space, it's literally displacing artists. I feel parang similar yung mga challenges that I feel that kumbaga what will work for education might be helpful for them and the other way around, no? Um, Sige, maybe my first reaction of many is the CHED outcomes, no? If we want to go back to that. I think
Yes,
the outcomes naman are universal. So in a way we can sort of define the end in mind, right?
yes.
Um
The outcomes in mind, yeah.
yeah, we want students that understand stuff, can articulate stuff. The overlay I might suggest, syempre this is just me reacting, is remember how education came to be. I mean the current parang form of education, the system in itself, flawed and all, no, came to be. It is a technology. Education is technology. It
Yes,
came
yes.
about because of the Industrial Revolution.
Mm.
The first industrial revolution, in fact, no, that formalized education. Up until that point, you literally had to seek the monks in the mountains and learn sacred wisdom, diba? Or be taught by the priests.
Have private tutors, yes.
Oo. Or if you're royalty, ganyan, diba? Pero when things started to get industrialized, education was essential na. So you have to standardize what.
Mass education, yes.
Oo. So, and I tend to be a kind of an industrial, apply an industrial lens only because for me, it's the most familiar as a technology person. Do we see AI as an offshoot of that or a break? You can argue both ways, no? And maybe I'll summarize it by saying, do we see AI as just a natural evolution of the internet? Remember how the internet was actually very disruptive?
Mm-hmm.
Parang the idea of having MOOCs, unheard of. Could never imagine a MOOC being considered seriously in academia until COVID made everyone a MOOC.
Yes,
And ngayon AI na. Or you could consider it a break because nga AI can sort of reason on its own. So it's no longer a passive form of information. Up until that point kasi, you go to Wikipedia, you read it. You go to a website, you read it. The library essentially became digitized. Pero library cards don't speak back and invent facts. But AI can. So I don't know where I'd lean on, no? But that's maybe my first lens na the nature of education as a technology was primarily a labor generation, labor production technology. Kasi before industrial revolutions, meron namang research. Kasi those are for me, the two functions of learning. Eh. You produce workers and you produce knowledge. Yung production of knowledge predates naman the industrial revolutions. Eh. Albeit very, you know, very inefficiently. Pero meron na. No? But
very isolated. Yeah.
pero nung nag-industrialize din yung industrial revolutions, so did research because you
Yeah.
had technology. So I feel, I don't know what the right answer is, but somewhere in the middle of that, we can incorporate that into your framework. Kasi the next logical path would be, let's acknowledge the outcome, produce more workers who know enough. And that might be wrong pala, no? Kasi why should education be solely for labor production? But even if you
Mm.
include knowledge production, clearly AI is destroying both from one angle. And then you have the Bloom's taxonomy, which I'm both a fan and a critic of. Kasi we've already long known that learning is not linear the way Bloom would
Mm.
mice it. In other words, you could argue pa nga na kunyari, a lot of people learn how to develop software not by reading a ComSci book,
Mm.
'di ba?
Mm.
But by
Yeah.
copying some code and doing a hackathon and working backwards. Parang ganun. So the taxonomy may not necessarily may actually apply, but it's the linear attitude of education that
The
favors.
cumulative aspect. Yeah.
Oo. It probably still is cumulative, but it's
Mm.
non-linear, maybe.
Yes, yes.
Whatever, no? So so this is where it's important to go back to that question. Is AI necessarily an evolution of it or a break? Kasi ngayon, AI can literally let you skip to level 6. It will
Yes.
literally write a paper even if you don't understand it.
Mm.
And do we consider that an error or a bug or a cheat like we would consider it now? Or is there a new parang level of meta learning or metacognition? I don't want to be fancy about it. Where you literally have a digital shadow of yourself, the way you're already creating one with your custom bot. And then what does learning look like at that level? This is very lofty stuff. I'm just reacting to it as I into it. So dun pa lang, no? Kasi now it interlocks with, if part of education's purpose is to produce labor, therefore it interlocks with this fear that AI will replace labor. 'Di ba? Kita mo, it's very, very interlocked. And I disagree, by the way, that AI will replace labor the same way Excel didn't replace accountants. But then, kasi Excel just became another columnar pad. Ganun yung nangyari. But in the AI's case, baka everyone just becomes an auditor and AI does the bookkeeping. Parang ganun eh. So, that fundamentally changes how accountancy may be taught. No, it's not that we drop all of the IFRS and all that stuff, but with an AI that knows it better than most accountants, parang nakita ko it's ano rin eh. It's a function then of where does it all eventually end? It'll end in private enterprise who will hire these accountants. And right now, I think um, this is very evident in how we measure, kunyari, corporate ethics, di ba? Dati we
Yeah.
already had the problem with corporations pursuing profit at the cost of the environment, at the cost of, morals. Kaya nga there's moral hazard, kaya nga there's corporate governance. Pero ngayon, AI can do all of that. So it really redounds back to, I'll make a hell of a lot more money if I reduce my OPEX to as little as possible through AI. Nothing in our current status quo in companies will prevent that from happening. I don't see it playing out that way myself, but it's always there. No? So those are first three pa lang. One is we have to consider education as an offshoot of industrialization, whether we see AI as a natural progression or a break. And then third na, maybe to sum up the third point I made is, what are the incentives or the outcomes we want? Why do we want to train as many knowledgeable students as possible so we can put them into a job so that it'll generate GDP, di ba? And then you already made the point long time ago. I think it was our second or third conversation na if we just judge it by economic benefit, you can actually have economic benefit without human flourishing. Yun pa, di ba? So that's an even
Yeah, in the capitalist system,
oh,
yes.
in the higher, that's an even higher lens. Now, if you have AI there as the grease, that'll just run amok, no? Kasi we could literally have armies of automatons, even human automatons, parang naging graft na lang yung AI sa brain nila. Yeah, maybe that's a fourth point, but I'll finish the third point first.
Yes.
Doing the economic labor, pero really dumb to begin with. Talagang dumb. So, suddenly, this was the reaction to communism dati, if you want to go there, na as people got richer, they don't necessarily become worse kasi that's the Marxist argument, 'di ba, na the bigger the divide between labor and the owners of labor, the
More exploitative.
it becomes more exploitative, and therefore revolution tayo. It didn't happen that way in many cases. So parang ito naman, parang biglang nagbumalik na as economic output increases, it now comes at the expense of cognitive load. Okay, that's the fourth point siguro din na I I might make the argument that the Akika phenomena is basically AI getting ahead of our I don't know, for lack of a better term, our educational process. Kasi nga students can leapfrog eh. So the incentive for them is not, they don't care about their neural pathways. They care about their diploma because they want
Yes.
to get a job. So it's kind of back to number three. So maybe that's a fourth point. Maybe you add that to Bloom's metacognition na if the desired outcome is better neural pathways, then there could be other ways of using AI to encourage that instead. Yun na nga, we don't measure that eh. Parang it's just an offshoot na the reason why classical Bloom seems to work back in the day is ganun din nagle-learn yung tao. Pero we can question that eh. I don't build neural pathways necessarily better by memorizing dates before I actually apply it. it often happens the opposite by actually getting my hands dirty with some activity, interacting with friends and classmates. The neural pathways, I mean, I'm sure we can dig up research that proves that improves neural pathways better. And then you do the memory work sa dulo. So, yun, parang those points are interrelated but we can certainly add that to your framework. In other words, it's not it's not dunking on your perspective. In fact, it should be an offshoot of it. And I like how you made the point sa dulo that teachers need to change the way they teach. Kasi nga up until that point, we never made mention of how faculty development should happen. That probably is a second framework to support this. Kasi we can be very prescriptive about how we want students to become something in the age of AI, whether with or without AI. But I frankly feel there's less discussed about how teachers should be developed in this environment. No? And we all know teacher adoption of AI lags students adoption naturally. Uh, so I
Way, way
should,
behind.
oh talaga, so that should naturally be, at least for me, my bias would be, let's fix the teachers. Pero yun na nga parang, I don't know. So anyway, that seems disjointed, but those are my 5 points. The linearity of the labor production point, the linearity of education, the incentives are not aligned, and then yung neural pathways. And then the fifth is what do we do with the faculty? Doon pa lang ang dami na nating pwedeng pag-usapan
Yeah, so I took note. Those are very important considerations moving forward. I think you raise a fundamental point, which is ano ba talaga ang purpose ng education today?
Yeah,
Kasi ang premise nung CHED policy of 2013 is we are educating people who understand, who can think, and who can engage in citizenship. So
correct.
civic competencies. So maybe it needs a deeper thought because I'm not part of the technical panel on general education, although I'm sympathetic to what they're trying to achieve. Ano? Kasi
Oo,
for me, in like ikaw, you're a blogger, obviously, because you're not just media savvy, but you're an engaged citizen.
sure.
If you ask me, my fearless forecast is the way education is being done now. There will be very few doc ligots in the future. Certainly not in the way you engage these issues. We will have 1,000 of you who are very, very quick content producers, producing content 1,000 times faster than you, more snazzy and so on, but will not have the depth or even the moral courage to question
Or
certain
they
things.
may not have the intent. I mean, I don't want to put myself on a pedestal.
Sure, sure.
Pero
That's what I meant because you have intent. So
yeah,
clearly they will have other intents. No? So in other words, it will change the landscape from those who pursue truth and enlightenment as against those who produce content for economic gain or for cloud chasing or whatnot. No? So this is a question really that society should answer for itself. That's why it goes to our fundamental social contract. What kind of a society are we building? As you know, I come from a fundamentally human development perspective, which means that we're building societies where humans flourish. And when we say humans flourish, they can reason, they can think, they can weigh evidence, they can build friendships, they can reflect and be humble about mistakes, things like this. But you're right, depending on what becomes economically or commercially attractive, all of those traditional values can disappear. Which is why I think government has a role to shape the conversation as well. Um,
no,
as it,
tsaka if I can interject there, no,
yeah.
and this is me being a little preachy about it.
Mm.
The way I'm seeing things develop, it's hard to ignore the geopolitical impact of it because hey, we're all dependent on US and maybe to a certain extent China. In fact, China is our largest trade partner. So if we go by pure trade balance alone, pro-China dapat tayo. Ano yung mga ganun? It's hard to make an oversimplification of it. But those macro, kumbaga, tectonic plates are moving in those places. And And of
Yeah.
course, it's
Mhm.
undeniable. We use these Western AI by default. Isa pa yun. And therefore, we've tied ourselves to that. And then I feel in the same way, this point number six siguro. Kasi kanina, we felt as economics improves, everyone's lives become better, pero hindi. This is the reverse feedback loop. For this trend to continue, we will encourage more mindless automatons. Parang yung ano, si Scale AI, di ba? Relying on
Yes.
some freelancers in Cagayan de Oro to label images because they need that raw data. Are the workers even compensated properly, or do they even need any skills to do that? Parang naging ano
They're
eh, bumaliktad eh.
exploited. They're exploited.
So ngayon, mangyayari, if we just carry that regression line to its natural conclusion, you'll have Global North, US, making tons of more money for their own
Mm,
human
mm.
development
Yeah.
at the expense now of all these mindless automatons in Asia. And in theory, meron namang pera there, but it's
Mm.
not gonna be commensurate. Maybe in aggregate, our GDP is one of the biggest GDPs in the world, by the way, di ba? Pero per capita, hindi. So people don't accept that eh. Parang, yeah, per capita maliit. Yeah, yeah, but as an economic power, we're actually one of the largest. It just doesn't redound to the to the citizens as much, no? So I feel yun na nga, without its kasi you mentioned government. I don't even know. Government needs to have that lens. No, we gotta have that macro
Yeah.
lens.
Yeah, definitely.
In the
Well,
same way, kasi I just happened to work with BPOs. I think that
mm,
was the case two
mm,
decades ago when BPOs were being contemplated, or at least in hindsight. And now, wow, this thing created the new middle class by just subsuming work that the West did not want to do. 'Di ba? So that model seems self-contained. Marami namang nag-flourish because of that. Pero may
indeed.
mga, may mga social ills din naman. But
Yes.
AI, and I can't see it developing the same way. As in, if we're not careful, we get shut out of the economic benefit, and then we get plagued with the social ills. And education is just one of many. Yun yung challenge.
Well, the point I'm making is that if the linear trajectory is to change, education is key.
Yeah.
Kasi nga, kung without a properly educated citizenry, the level of exploitative mining of our intellectual capital will just accelerate. Kasi mahilig tayo tumingin sa social media, so we generate a lot of data that feeds AI. Pero if we're doing it in a very uncritical way, not knowing yung sinasabi mo, yung geopolitical, and the point I'm saying, the way the akika is taking over the brain, that's why we need to change the narrative. How can we pursue pa rin our goals of having flourishing Filipinos because we have so many of them. We do produce a lot of children, but unless we educate them properly, they will just be continually exploited. Which is why in the recommendation we were making, we can partner with the AI companies so that they can make AIs that are fine-tuned for education. This is not a new idea. Khan Academy did it. They're rolling out yung Kanmigo to select partners. And the way Kanmigo works, when you try to learn with it, it doesn't give you answers. It's Socratic. It will guide you. So
Yeah.
it is not, in other words, disabling you. The problem with Gen AI as it is used now, for young people, no, I'm not talking about professionals. We can use this as much as we want. We already have education. But if you give this without supervision and without properly fine-tuned models, it is really leading to massive, massive akika. I think ang isang platform na pwede nga itong mga chatbots eh. And then, kaya nga dun sa aming recommendation, yung unang recommendation talaga is the training of faculty. So I agree with you 100%.
Yep.
But they have to have an interest to now change their approach to learning itself, which is what we're trying to advocate na okay pa rin naman itong goal ng ano eh. I think any company naman will not want graduates who just does mema or just parrot, because if they just want parrots, they can just have chatbots, right? If they want human beings, the human beings have to have these capabilities. But we're losing these capabilities quite fast because there has to be a bigger dialogue or a bigger buzz, which is why your podcasts are important, so that people are aware that Akika is real. yung point na whether the AI has surpassed our ability to learn, I would just add a qualification. Kasi nga, yung reliability ng AI has never been really established to the satisfaction of the schools.
Yep.
Kaya nga if we can, I mean, going back to the calculator analogy, no, as I pointed out in LinkedIn, when the calculators were being developed, in-involved talaga ang mga businesses and mga schools eh. That's why when they were rolled out, they were reliable. I think we need a similar collaborative approach sa AI for education. I mean, there can be AI for recreation and all of that, but for AI for education should be such that it really activates the generation effect and reinforces the learner for actually learning. Because it's not just the neural pathway, even the motivation will change. That's why games are so effective, di ba, Doc? That's why the laziest student in my class will go 10 hours straight playing a game because the way the AI of the game is designed is it really gives
Engages you. It
it
engages.
engages you. So there's no denying that algorithms have
We
powerful
should
effects.
we
Now,
should
if we
bring
can
this
use
up.
them,
We should bring this up in another talk, no? Because
yes,
there's another Ben, no? I don't know if you know Ben Beltran, the priest. I had him on a podcast then.
yes, I believe I know him.
Yeah, and he made the point about what we call attention deficit
Mm,
disorder among students. Exactly the same point you made. Na yeah, these ADD students can stay up until 2 in the morning playing
mm,
Mobile Legends.
mm.
So that's not ADD by definition, but it's their ADD in the classroom. So I mean, of course it was a figure of speech, pero the point is if learning is traditional learning is not as exciting to them, they
Let's
will
make it
naturally.
exciting.
Yeah, I
Oh,
mean the solution is to excite them.
to make
Pero
it
ito nga eh,
exciting.
para for me excitement is kind of a surface metric.
Mm,
I mean the outcome is still someone who learns something. Surface
yeah.
metric is are they engaged. Pero yun na nga, there's this deeper thing na I feel and which could essentially just be a Bloom 2.0, no? Where you add na the AI component. Like for example, wala sa Bloom ang validating an AI.
Well, we can say that that's under evaluating, right?
You can. But
Uh,
it's basically evaluating yourself, no, or evaluating what you know. Pero if you add a slice to it na,
yeah,
I
yeah.
said this eh, parang, then it in a way, it's either between 4 and 5 or 5
Yes, yes,
minutes
yes.
where you intentionally prompt AI, give you something, but then debate the AI.
Yes.
Diba?
Actually, yun yung nasa chatbot ko. And
Mm,
evaluating here literally includes what you're pointing out.
yeah,
Because evaluating means evaluating in a domain. So if you're a doctor, you're evaluating a patient. If you're a
yeah.
learner, you can evaluate a chatbot. But you have to have criteria. This is the problem. If students do not know how AI works, their criteria could be naive.
I think all of this, maybe
Oo.
that's Bloom 2.0. We just come up with an AI updated, which could be your CI or something. Like, kunyari, the creation process,
Hmm.
if I use coding again as the, ano, example, parang the true test of a developer is produce software, diba? But then now, you can co-create software with AI. But it has its pitfalls. Now, if you're over-reliant on AI, the software is gonna be bloated, probably has bugs. But that's conceptually no different to writing your own bloated code. So parang nagkaroon ng bifurcation for every
Yes.
step, di ba? Or for example, remembering facts, yan ang pinakamadali. Kasi you can
Oo.
prompt AI for the Wikipedia outcome. Pero occasionally, mag-hallucinate. So, remembering facts includes a component where you double check kung tama si AI or not. So parang ganun,
Yes,
nagkaroon lang siya,
yes.
nag-bifurcate siya. I think the best one is and you spoke about chain of thought reasoning. Uh I think that and by the way, we have to update our approach to Gen AI to include the agentic component, which is by prompting itself, AI sort of becomes I don't know, cognitive,
Semi-autonomous.
semi-autonomous,
Yes.
semi-sentient in a sense. No, it's too heavy a term. Pero it's now able to string together,
Yeah,
parts of itself to to do complicated
it's a workflow, not just a
work.
chat. Mm.
Oo. So, That's even worse if you think about it,
Well,
because
exactly. Oh,
it's
yeah.
if it's making these mistakes and it
Yeah.
compounds with every node, adi patay tayo dyan. What you
Well,
end.
which is why I really reached out to you because I am building AI workflows now.
Oo.
Because again, in our hands, this is not very risky. But you can imagine, I mean, let's just think back to what the Guzman did with, ano, di ba, the love bug worm. That
Oo.
was already an agent, eh. So, of course, he was naive. He did not mean it.
Well, it was
But
a game for him, basically.
you can just imagine if in the hands of, ano, all of these agentic technologies, uh, where, there are a lot of them. But remember, they're based on similarly probabilistic models. So the level of validation, ito ngang comment naglabas, di ba, ang perplexity. Biro mo, ibibigay mo lahat yung personal data mo so it can book everything for you.
Yeah.
Now, if they don't build all the safeguards in there and there are no industry standards to make sure those safeguards are in, it took the business industry a long time to agree on the standards for credit card swiping and even SWIFT for banks.
Yeah.
Kasi the validations are extremely robust for those things. Eto, it's there, but I think we should not get ahead of ourselves kasi
Can
nga,
we use that as a good anchor?
oo,
Kasi speaking from banking experience, a lot of the things we take for granted for banking, even kunyari mga Basel 1, 2, 3, diba? Came about because of an issue on trust. You don't trust the markets, you don't trust banks, moral
yeah,
hazard. So in a way, it's got an ethical lens agad eh. So ergo, you spend a lot of time debating and validating something because you have to be able to trust the financial system. Otherwise, commerce ceases to happen. I wonder if there's a similar mechanism. We spoke about this when we were in the touring session, diba? What brought about privacy, what brought about cybercrime law, in a way, is kind of a global accord where we have to be able to trust each other because we observe similar procedures in terms of privacy.
yeah,
Parang yung cybercrime, ganun din. There was a Budapest or Bucharest something. Na ganun din. We have to be able to prosecute cybercriminals cross-border because normally remote naman yung mga yan and they affect countries across the globe and they will be in different jurisdictions. Therefore, it made sense to have similar cybercrime laws. So Interpol can come in and take this.
yes.
And I was wondering, what about AI? Kasi in and maybe it's partly a cop out, pero without that parang global need for trust, and we're all just going to rely on whatever productivity and capitalism. And the current flawed AI
We're
basically
cooked.
promotes that already in a very no, obtuse way.
We're basically cooked.
Oo, at the expense of yan, cognitive load, at the
Mm.
expense of real incomes. Aggregate income, okay lang, maakyat. Pero real income sa mga tao, wala, no?
And
um,
we need the real income kasi yung population natin malaki eh.
so yeah, I have to
Mm.
confess,
Mm.
I don't know the answer to that. Short of a new kind of United Nations coming in. So,
Yeah, in the way we dealt naman with atomic energy, it was really a global accord.
ganun din,
And
di
I
ba?
don't think there is any other way kasi that's how humans solve problems. We
Pero
have
wait, to
accords.
qualify naman that,
Mm.
and this is something na should certainly be the next episode. After watching that AI 2027 documentary, there is also a tendency, and I'm guilty of it. We're guilty of it, where we get put in the doomer bucket, and
Mm. Mm.
and disregarded. And then on the flip side, you also have potentially damaging regulations na as a reaction to that. So I don't think it should be like 50-50 balance because the risks are not 50-50 certainly.
Mm. Mm.
Pero in a way, we have to be able to entertain both sides flexibly
Yeah, yeah.
and take action. So let's
Yeah, I
start
think,
with education, a
yeah.
universal acknowledgement of the risks, which I feel you've already touched upon. That should be parang rolled out. Okay, here's the risks that we're entertaining. Both if we adopt AI naively and if we don't adopt it, we're cooked. And then
Mm.
here are some approaches, which obviously the caveat is while we're rolling out these approaches, baka the next generation GPT-5 renders them all moot na rin. But there's no option eh. Kasi if we
Well, I
call it
think it will
AI,
help if we directly engage nga with the companies. Kasi ang nangyayari ngayon, they're pretty much on their own eh.
yeah,
Uh, which I said, as I said, did not happen in any other industry. All other industries, yung mga joint standards building bodies, included the stakeholders there.
yeah,
Eto, unique talaga yung path niya. Of course, the European Union, kasi August 2025 na, so the general purpose AI rules for Europe will kick in na eh. Yung mga pre
scheduled to kick in na. Okay na,
Oh,
20.
it kicks in na August 2025. Pero all the AI that pre-existed the EU Act, they have until 2027 for full compliance, no? Yung mga nauna. Pero itong general purpose, which is what we call itong mga ChatGPT, mga Claude, general purpose yun eh. It will kick in na sa Europe, even though the Americans have been campaigning to roll it back. The statement last week of the EU authority is they're not budging, they're not rolling it back.
Yeah,
So,
kasi well, even the AI safety report focuses on general purpose AI.
mm,
Kaya that should help at least ease the concerns na pati pa ba Excel sheet ko ire-review yung mga ganun, in which I've used
mm,
as a
mm.
figure of speech. We have to be very clear then. And yun na nga, going back to our own local regulation, the lack of definition also defeats us. We don't say what AI we refer to. Pero at least in education, we're very specific. It's the Gen AI, it's the large language model,
Yes.
the foundation models, whatever you want, no?
And that's the reason it's risky in education because competence dapat ng student to generate eh. Kaya lang, pinalitan ng AI. In other domains, I think they have to, like in Excel, obviously there are other types of risks that maybe generation is not the issue. I would think accuracy would be. Kasi even in statistical analysis, we use SPSS, SAS, JSP. When students use Excel, I tell them, look, Excel
Careful.
is useful, but it is not certified by the statistical associations. It is not certified for statistical use. Pero pwede na siya for over-the-counter type of applications. Kaya lang yung validation niya, yung precision level niya, hindi yan pang industrial grade statistics eh. Pwede na siya pang desktop talaga. So
Mm,
as long as you know, sabi ko, kasi you remember the Pentium bug before, di ba? 14th digit naman yung error nun. Most customers will never have need naman that accuracy eh. Kaya lang if it's used, let's say, for calculating the trajectory of a missile, it multiplies very, very quickly.
yeah.
Diba? Kaya lang naging ano lang siya, naging PR bruhaha because sinabi pa kasi nilang Intel inside eh. So they became the victim of their own marketing.
Yeah.
It should have been a non-issue at the time, no?
Yeah, but yun na nga eh. I think our ability to proportionality, I think is the term we use, diba?
Yes, yes.
To assess the level of damage or potential level of damage. And that requires talaga very, objective, pragmatic
Yeah.
discussion. And
As you always say, talagang impact assessments talaga. Because like ito, ang dali naman eh. We can do a controlled study of all my students, ask them an issue, and you can see na talagang nagnganga talaga at mema eh. So,
proper na. Oo.
these are measurable. They're not only palpable, you can measure them. And I've been calling this out since December of 2023. Kaya nga ilalabas na namin tong guidance na to. Kasi once they hit the employers, babalikan na naman kami ng mga employers na walang alam itong mga tao nyo. Pero sinasabi nga namin, we're trying to address the issue at the same time as we are teaching them also how to use AI properly. Pero there's a lot of back work to do kasi nga na-release sa kanila prematurely.
Yeah.
Yun yung naging challenge talaga namin.
Yeah.
This happened also with cable TV if you remember yung mga ano 'di ba anime kasi anime naman in Japan is not really all for children eh. Maraming
Yeah.
anime na for adults na expose yung mga Pilipino na bata right under the nose of their parents which affected the values of an entire generation.
Yeah, we're suffering because of it now.
Yeah, there are echoes of that until today. So I think with this conversation, at least we're putting it out there. Now, this is something we should all talk about. And when the discussions come around for the Cayetano bill and the others, ano pa tayo, mag-isip pa tayo kung ano pa yung mga specific risks in other domains other than education. So that, as you said, we will have a very sober and research-based approach to our own regulation.
Yeah, it's also good nga na we bring it against that context of labor because I feel like I was at the Pasok event last week,
Aha, aha.
and I think there was another a Paco event naman on another week. And when inevitably government will pressure schools to produce more labor. That seems
Mm.
to be the kaya nga upgrade your curricula, STEM, skills framework. That's for labor production eh. And again, yeah, certainly that's one angle. Pero if it comes at the expense of cognitive load, if it comes at the expense of knowledge production,
Mm.
like and we're not even talking about yung mga surface indicators like PISA scores and all that stuff. Pero yun nga, if in the quest to produce more labor, we actually reduce the number of scientists, sa parang ganun na lang siguro.
Yes.
But I don't know who really won that argument. Parang I think we all lost kung ganun na. Kasi, and now, DepEd's already rolling out the Gen AI at some form, no? In basic ed. Ched probably will have the same pressure eventually. Maybe once this work comes out. Yun. I think we have to make everyone think about the implications.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah.
It's
Okay.
not business as usual, Doc.
It's business unusual.
Unusual, yes.
Oo. Well, yun na nga. I think we've talked kulang pa, but as always, but I think this is a great
I'm good. Thank you.
add-on to giving context to the problem. Plus, what I like about you actually weren't harping too much about a problem per se. You're actually testing a solution. So what's the next step for this? You're gonna release it or paano ba? How's it gonna work?
Well, for the CHED guideline, it will go to the CHED Unbank, then they will deliberate. That's why I titled it as proposed because it has not been released.
Yeah.
So if the CHED Unbank releases it, we will be the first technical panel to have a guidance on AI use, the business panel, which is just as well because it was business organizations that released the AI to the wild. It's only good that business schools also are the first to give guidance. As regards itong mga chatbot na I think it would be nice if other companies really develop AI really for helping students learn.
Yep.
I think it's a whole category that deserves a lot of attention. Kasi language model nga siya, it has a perfect potential because a lot of what we do in learning is language-based. Hindi naman lahat, pero a lot of it is language-based. So,
Content, basically.
perfect siya doon, di ba? Kaya lang yung philosophy na it is a knowledge product, that is the challenge. Kung gusto nila maging knowledge product, then there has to be vetting, just like calculators, di ba? May vetting dapat. So maybe it will reach that point na there will be a whole industry of knowledge AI, not just edtech. Kasi ang edtech, the problem with edtech, it's just the use of technology for teaching. It doesn't mean that it is actually improving learning. There are two different things eh. So you could build nice, shiny electric vehicles, but it may not be effective as transport options in a flood-prone country like the Philippines, for example. So
Yeah.
those are separate questions. So I think yun yung two next steps that have to be addressed. No? Yung teacher training for AI educational chatbots, and then itong policy ng CHED and how it will be rolled out. So it remains to be seen how soon it will roll out. But I'll keep you posted, Doc.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, people listening to this at least they have an advanced, clue already what's happening. And yun na nga, maybe one of my last points would be people shouldn't be waiting for people to dictate on them, no? How things should go. If you have a perspective, you're listening to this about education, I think now is really the utmost time to be heard. Even if
Yes.
it's just commenting on a social post,
Yeah.
para lang we capture it. Kasi look, how many people commented on that unnumbered Cayetano bill. I mean, for all we know, the real bill will be different. Pero there seems to be an interest in ano nga, not necessarily regulating or deregulating, pero more about what is the right type of regulation.
Mm-hmm.
And I
Yeah.
feel that's encouraging kasi kahit papaano, it's not like mga ibang regulations na it's a complete pushback or a complete endorsement. Here talaga nuance matters eh.
It has to be nuanced, definitely. Because may potential naman talaga siya. Eh.
Yeah. Well, anyway, thank you, Prof. Ben, and
Thank you, Doc.
hope
Good
we
being with
hear
you
more
again.
about this in the near future.
Yes, let's do that.